What is going on, everyone? Welcome into Big Time Football Talk. So I wanted to get into this. I wanted to talk about, BetMGM, I was looking at the odds for next year's national championship, and I think it's really interesting that LSU is the 8th best odds by BetMGM at plus 1,800. I think there's a lot of good value in LSU picking them to win the national championship. This is a team that they brought in the number one linebacker in the country, Harold Perkins, last year. Had a really nice season. They have some talented players on the offensive line. They started 2 true freshmen, returned Will Campbell. They have experience at quarterback in Jane Daniels. And Brian Kelly's done an excellent job working the transfer portal. They brought in a talented linebacker from Oregon State who led them in tackles. So really, there's not a lot of weaknesses on this LSU roster. I guess you could argue running back, cornerback, but LSU, you can make an argument. They're likely the, second, third, probably the third most talented team in the SEC. So I think there's sneaky value in the LSU Tigers. The LSU football team is definitely a team to watch this year. Also, and on DraftKings, though, they're plus 1,600 odds, BetMGM plus 1,800 odds. Clemson actually ahead of them here at BetMGM. In DraftKings, they were a little further behind them. But Clemson will be interesting this year because they lose some guys. They lose Brian Brzee, Miles Murphy, some talented defensive players, but they also bring back Andrew Mukaba, Nate Wiggins. They'll have a very talented secondary. Cade Klubnik is shown that he's can make plays at the quarterback position despite just being very young. And they still have Dabo Swinney as the head coach walking the sidelines, arguably the second best coach in college football, a guy with a resume that speaks for himself. So Clemson, definitely a team to keep an eye on. You got to believe 2 years ago I'd say was kind of a fluke, but you say, it was a down year for Clemson. They still went 10-3, and then this past year, you'd argue it was a down year, but they won the ACC. So maybe last year was kind of the turning the corner to getting back to the national dominant team. But Clemson is a team, like I'll touch back on LSU. Clemson is a team that has shown they can match up in the trenches with the SEC teams. That's the thing about LSU. They lost the SEC championship to Georgia, but they weren't necessarily dominated in the trenches. LSU and Georgia and Alabama, why there's only a few teams every year that can win the national championship realistically, and the conversation all starts with Alabama, Georgia, is because those teams are just so dominant in the trenches. When they play opponents outside of the SEC, you really just see them beat up on teams, not just because they out-execute them and out-coach them, but they also are just so physically dominant at the line of scrimmage. It's just a complete mismatch. Florida State is another team at plus 2,000. Florida State, they're going to have some talented players, maybe the best edge rusher in college football in Jared Verse. They also have Jordan Travis back at quarterback. Johnny Wilson's a talented receiver as well. But yeah, LSU, you got to believe that. Really, to me, why LSU is such a good bet, you got to believe that LSU is probably, like I touched on, the third most talented team in the SEC. And you could argue they have the third best. They are one of the top 3-4 teams that I think could win the national championship. I think my Michigan Wolverines are going to be very good this year. Michigan just, they really have not shown they can match up in the trenches physically with SEC teams. Obviously, Michigan just going to be loaded with talent this year. Maybe have the top 2 running backs in the country. But like I've thought about this in my head, like if Michigan and LSU met week 1, like LSU and Florida State are going to play week 1, that's going to be a telling game for both those two teams. If Michigan and LSU met on a neutral field, I would have a hard time picking Michigan to win the game. You got to believe LSU would probably be, I don't know what Vegas would put that line. You got to believe LSU would probably be like a maybe 4.5, 5-point favorite on a neutral field. So is that like the end-all, be-all to why I would be so confident in LSU? Probably not, but that just goes to show that even on a neutral site, LSU would be, probably likely just under a touchdown favorite to Michigan. And USC is going to be in a position to win the Pac-12. They got the best quarterback in college football. USC still trying to rebuild the trenches and really get more stout at the line in the offensive defensive line. It doesn't help they lose Andrew Voorhees, a talented offensive lineman. But they do have, weapons galore at receiver, and then the quarterback position is very strong as well, and they have the coach. So yeah, USC, despite missing, the top-notch offensive defensive lineman like they had under Pete Carroll, they check all the boxes as far as quarterback, skill position, and head coach. So they have all those ingredients, but just missing the one key ingredient as far as is just dominant big man on the offensive defensive line. Penn State plus 2,500. Penn State will be an interesting team. I think they'll be good. Penn State had one of those years where they beat everyone they were supposed to, but then Michigan and Ohio State, the two best teams of the Big Ten, they lost to. So it was one of those years where I always tip your hat to those kind of seasons because I think there's a lot to be said about beating who you're supposed to beat. It kind of reminded me of Arkansas back in 2011 when Arkansas won 11-2 and they lost to Alabama and LSU. I think there's something to be said. Well, if you're going to lose, you're going to lose to the two of the best teams, and like they lost to Michigan, Ohio State. They lost to two top 6 teams in the country. So hats off to them for beating who they're supposed to beat and capping off their season with the Rose Bowl win. But yeah, that's last year. It's all about this year. Drew Aller will be the quarterback. They lose Joey Porter. So shoes to fill, but Penn State, a team that's recruited well, and they should be able to they should likely be a favorite in almost every game they play, regardless of, or except for when they play Michigan and Ohio State, most likely. I think Washington's another interesting team at plus 4,000 odds. Maybe one of the nice long shots. Michael Penix Jr., one of the best quarterbacks in the country, I touched on. Michael Penix, their head coach, they got a new head coach. It seems like he's really injected life into Washington. And Washington is a team that low-key recruits pretty well, to be honest. So maybe they are a team that gets off to a hot start and gets people buzzing, and maybe they can pull off a few upsets, get themselves to a Pac-12 championship with maybe only one loss, and we'll see what happens in the Pac-12 championship. And I know that's expecting a lot and saying a lot, but you see it all the time. Teams get off to 8-0, 9-0 start. Maybe Washington does stumble a game, but with Michael Penix Jr., you got to believe that they'll be in a lot of games and they'll be favored in a lot of games. Yeah, and then of course we got to go up to the top. Georgia at plus 225. Georgia, three-peat is very hard to do. Georgia going to be an excellent football team again. Malachi Starks, Javon Bullard, Kamari Lassitier. They return, several notable guys in the secondary specifically. Still have Kirby Smart, like I touched on, is definitely a top 3 coach, maybe the second best coach now in college football behind Nick Saban. So Georgia, a team that's recruited like a monster, a juggernaut, going to be right in the mix, plus 225. Alabama, what to do with Bama next year? I predicted Bama to win this year because I believed in Will Anderson and Bryce Young having those two key pieces. Alabama plus 500. So Alabama this year, going to have a new quarterback. To be honest, Milroe, it seems like will be the guy, but it might not be. They have Jermaine Burton back. They have some experience. Colby Prentice was a talented freshman, so they have some experience at receiver. Maybe Jermaine Burton takes another step. I think he's got a skill set where he could play better this year, and also they Yeah, Bama, they still will be really good at the line of scrimmage. Have J.C. Latham on the offensive line. Do have a really strong secondary. They have Kool-Aid McKinstry, who might be the top corner off the board in this year's upcoming draft. So Alabama still very talented, and you got to believe Nick Saban is getting anxious and hungry to boast another national title trophy. I'll touch on. I'm just going down the list here, I'm trying to touch on all the top teams here. Ohio State at plus 600. Ohio State still have Ryan Day as coach. Ryan Day, an excellent coach, despite maybe Ohio State fans not being too happy with the back-to-back losses to Michigan. But Ohio State, still a really good football team, and this is a team that's going to have, there's like 4 or 5 guys they have projected that could be first-round picks next season. So Ohio State, despite breaking in a new quarterback, it's likely going to be Kyle McCord, former 5-star. Despite a new quarterback, they have some talented guys on defense coming back. JT Tuimoloau, who had a huge game in the Penn State game, Jack Sawyer. They get Jihad Carter, a transfer from Syracuse, comes over in the secondary, and Denzel Burke, maybe be up there with Kool-Aid McKinstry as one of the top corners for next year's draft. So there is definitely NFL talent on the defense. They're going to have to replace 3 starters on the offensive line, but Ohio State going to be a good football team, and likely have a chance to be undefeated and favored in every game, and 11-0 when they head to Ann Arbor to play the 12th and final game next season. So, yeah, just want to touch on that. Thanks for tuning in to Big Time Football Talk. Make sure to stay tuned for more episodes and clips from the show. Till next time, peace.